Welcome to Off Record. There are secrets the FBI keeps from the public, and then there are the ones they keep from their own agents. In this video, I'm going to reveal 4 of those secrets, each one darker than the last. And by the time we reach the final one, you'll understand why some doors in DC don't have handles, because they were never meant to be opened. Part 1. Operation Northwoods. When the U.S. government wrote a script to terrorize its own people. I've gone through enough declassified documents to know when something's off. Most of the time, they're just dry policy drafts, outdated memos, or heavily redacted nonsense. But every once in a while, you find one that doesn't feel like a document. It feels like a confession. That's exactly what Operation Northwoods was. A confession buried under layers of sanitized language, strategic objectives, and cold military logic. On the surface, it looked like just another Cold War contingency. But once you read past the headers and timelines, you realize what it really was, an official blueprint to deceive the American people and orchestrate false flag attacks on U.S. soil, all in the name of war. The year was 1962. The Bay of Pigs had embarrassed the CIA. Tensions with Cuba were climbing. Washington was desperate for a way to justify military intervention. And that's when the Joint Chiefs of Staff drafted Operation Northwoods. The plan was simple, disturbing, and incredibly detailed. Create a series of staged terrorist events, blame them on the Cuban government, and use the resulting outrage to launch a full-scale invasion. They proposed bombing U.S. cities, hijacking planes, sinking ships filled with Cuban refugees, even faking the deaths of American college students. One of the most jaw-dropping proposals involved replacing a civilian aircraft with a drone, flying it over international waters, and detonating it mid-air. The media would be fed a story about innocent Americans being killed by Cuban operatives. Photos would be released, names published, mourning staged, except none of it would be real. Another part of the plan involved staging shootings in Miami, planting evidence, and allowing Cuban suspects to be caught just in time. They even considered attacking U.S. military bases and blowing up an American ship near Guantanamo Bay, blaming it all on Cuban aggression. And this wasn't some fringe suggestion buried in a stack of crazy ideas. It was reviewed, refined, and formally approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking military officers in the United States. Let that sink in. The top brass of the U.S. military signed off on a plan to commit acts of terrorism against their own citizens. And if you think they hesitated, think again. There's no language in the document suggesting caution, no moral debate, no concern about ethics or legality, just logistics. The tone is cold, clinical, almost robotic. It reads like a PowerPoint presentation with bullets like maximize media coverage and minimize Cuban denial. This wasn't about defense, it was about manipulation, about manufacturing consent. The only reason Operation Northwoods never happened is because one man stopped it, President John F. Kennedy. He read the proposal and rejected it outright. No edits, no negotiations, just a firm, absolute no. And that decision didn't sit well with the people who wrote it. Not long after, he began clashing more openly with the intelligence community. He talked about breaking the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scattering it to the wind. And then, in 1963, Kennedy was assassinated. Now, I'm not here to say that Operation Northwoods got him killed. But let's be honest, when a president starts pushing back against the most powerful, most secretive institutions in the country, his enemies multiply fast, and they tend to stay invisible. The Northwoods file stayed buried for decades. It was never leaked. No whistleblower came forward. It only came to light in 1997, almost by accident, as part of the records released during the investigation into Kennedy's assassination. And here's the part that should make your skin crawl. No one was punished, no trials, no congressional hearings, no media storm. The story came and went like a puff of smoke. One of the darkest plots ever conceived by the U.S. military was quietly declassified and filed away in the weird history section, forgotten by design. And if something this elaborate, this dangerous, could get as far as it did without public scrutiny, what else was written? What else got approved but never leaked? Or worse, what if something like Northwoods didn't just stay on paper? What if it evolved, adapted, found new names, new enemies, and kept moving in the shadows? Because here's the truth. Operation Northwoods wasn't just a plan. It was a window into the mindset of an empire, one that saw truth as negotiable, morality as optional, and public opinion as nothing more than a lever to be pulled at will. So the next time you see a crisis unfold and the media hands you a story neatly wrapped in flags and flames, ask yourself, is it real or is it rehearsed? Part 2. The Natural Deaths. The FBI refused to investigate. Some deaths come gently, a last breath in the quiet of night. A body found still with no violence, no struggle, just absence. We call them natural. We grieve, we bury, and we move on. But then there are other deaths. Deaths that arrive too soon, too clean, too well-timed. And when those deaths involve people who knew too much, spoke too loudly, or looked in the wrong direction, you start to wonder, was it really natural, or just made to look that way? You see, the FBI has a strange habit. It investigates everything, until it doesn't. Ask around in Washington, and you'll hear whispers about files that were never opened, phones that never rang, autopsies that never happened, deaths that were stamped no foul play before the body even turned cold. Let's take Michael Hastings, award-winning journalist, war reporter, a man who poked too many bears and didn't know how to whisper. In 2013, he told colleagues he was being watched. He said he was onto something about the intelligence community, something big. He sent one last email. I'm onto a story and I need to go off the radar for a bit. 12 hours later, he was dead. The official story: car accident, high speed, lost control. Engine thrown 60 feet from the vehicle. No skid marks, no alcohol, no drugs, just silence. The LAPD closed the case almost immediately. The FBI, they denied having any file on him until it was proven they did. Then they stopped talking altogether. Or how about Dr. Frank Olson, a military biochemist who fell from a 13th-story hotel window in 1953. They said he jumped. Suicide. End of story. Except Olson had just attended a secret CIA meeting days before, and he'd begun expressing doubts about human experimentation, about what the agency was doing behind closed doors. Decades later, his body was exhumed. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head before he hit the ground. Still think he jumped? The FBI never reopened the case. Then there's Gary Webb, the investigative journalist who linked the CIA to drug trafficking during the Contra War. He was smeared, discredited, pushed out of journalism entirely. In 2004, he was found dead, gunshot wound to the head. Correction, 2 gunshot wounds to the face. They ruled it a suicide, and just like that, another question mark was buried 6 feet under, along with the man who had the answers. What these deaths have in common isn't just their mystery, it's the deafening silence that follows them. You'd expect outrage, investigations, congressional hearings, but what you get is paperwork, a statement, a shrug, the occasional reminder that we found no evidence of foul play. But you don't need to remove evidence if you prevent it from being created in the first place. No inquiry means no contradictions. No autopsy means no anomalies. No investigation means no truth. And that's the brilliance of it. Because the most perfect cover-up isn't a lie, it's the complete absence of a question. So who decides what death is worth investigating? Who gets a case file? And who gets a toe tag? There's no official rule book, no press release, just a quiet sorting system deep inside an agency that doesn't need to explain itself. And the more you look at it, the more the pattern reveals itself. The scientists, the whistleblowers, the journalists, the hackers, the ones who look too closely at what hides beneath the veneer of national security. They die of heart attacks in their 30s. They crash into trees with no camera footage. They accidentally overdose, even though they didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't touch pills. And the agencies that should be uncovering the truth, they close the door before it ever opens. Why? Maybe because the truth isn't convenient. Or maybe, just maybe, because in some cases, the truth is guilty. So the next time someone famous dies suddenly, and the story feels just a little too clean, pay attention to what isn't said. Pay attention to what's missing. Pay attention to how quickly the conversation ends, because real death leaves a mess. And these are far too tidy. Part 3. The mind-reading software that worked too well. There's a line they always swore they'd never cross, a moral boundary so absolute, even the most secretive programs were supposed to stop short of it. Predicting human behavior, fine. Profiling suspects, expected. But reading thoughts, peering inside the human mind without consent, that was the red line, or so they said. What they didn't tell you is that they crossed that line decades ago, quietly, strategically, and when they finally got what they wanted, they buried it. The project didn't have a flashy name, no Latin acronym or Greek symbolism. Internally, it was just referred to as the interface, a closed-door collaboration between FBI behavioral scientists, military contractors, and a tech firm that no longer exists on paper. On the surface, the goal seemed innocuous enough: early detection of violent intent in high-risk environments, airports, prisons, public rallies. A noble cause, at least on paper. But what they were really building was something far more ambitious. They weren't trying to predict actions. They were trying to preempt thoughts. The system combined EEG headsets, facial micro-expression mapping, and real-time linguistic analysis. It didn't just watch you. It listened to the words you didn't say. It tracked the flicker in your eyes when you suppressed a reaction. It measured the tension in your hands when you were told you're free to leave. And after months of feeding the system thousands of hours of footage, it started making predictions, alarming ones. Prisoners who'd never shown aggression were flagged as imminent threats, and days later lashed out violently. TSA agents began testing it on travelers, and in one incident, it correctly identified a man carrying a weapon before he reached the security gate, before he even reached for it. That was the moment it shifted from science to something darker. The technology didn't stop at reading fear or rage. It began identifying guilt, and then, more troublingly, suspicion itself. It wasn't just spotting people who planned to commit crimes. It was flagging those who might think about it. That's when the panic started. One internal memo described the system as psychologically destabilizing, even to agents. Some testers began hallucinating. Others reported paranoia, insomnia, a creeping sensation that they themselves were being observed by the machine. One handler wrote, "It doesn't feel like we're reading minds anymore. It feels like it's reading ours." But the real fracture came when the system flagged someone with high aggression markers during a routine scan of federal employees. He wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't on a watch list. He was one of them, a senior agent, and within 48 hours, he was escorted out of the building under psychiatric hold. No crime, no violence, just an unreadable thought. That's when the program was shut down. Officially, the reason given was inconsistent results. But the whispers told a different story, that the system worked too well, that it couldn't be controlled, that once you built a machine capable of interpreting thought, you couldn't stop it from interpreting yours. The facility where it ran, deep in Nevada, was dismantled within weeks. Every document shredded, every hard drive crushed. The tech firm? Gone, absorbed by a parent company with no name and no logo. The test subjects? Silenced through settlements, gag orders, or psychiatric discreditation. And yet, something lingers because even though the program vanished, the data didn't. Fragments of the interface's code have surfaced in unrelated projects. Airport surveillance systems, advanced chatbot AIs, behavioral health tools. And buried deep in some of them are the same neural pattern flags, which leads to a terrifying possibility. What if the experiment never really ended? What if it was simply decentralized? What if the next time you speak to a therapist app, or vent to a smart assistant, or even just pause too long before answering a yes or no question at a border checkpoint, something somewhere is registering the signal? Because the scariest technology isn't the kind that fails. It's the kind that succeeds so completely they have to pretend it never existed. Walk into the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C., and you'll see what they want you to see. Rows of security scanners, fluorescent lighting, armed guards with polite eyes. Floors labeled, doors locked, IDs scanned. It's the fortress of American law enforcement, and every square inch is accounted for, or so they say. But there's something strange about the blueprints. Not the ones you find online, the official ones, sure, but the internal ones, the maintenance logs, the elevator shaft mappings, the ventilation diagrams. And if you look close enough, compare them long enough, question the right janitor, you'll notice a gap. Between the 6th and 7th floors, there's a space. Too wide to be ignored, too symmetrical to be accidental. But it has no name, no number, no badge access. The elevators don't stop there, the stairwells skip over it. And when you ask someone who should know, they pause. Just for a second, just enough. Officially, that floor doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's known as the archive. According to internal rumor, and yes, even inside the Bureau, there are whispers, it's the final vault. The place where the most sensitive case files go when deletion isn't safe enough. Documents too dangerous to store digitally. Audio tapes too revealing to transcribe. Names too explosive to put in ink. Some say it's nothing but cabinets and silence. Others say there are people assigned to that floor who haven't been seen anywhere else in the building. People with no payroll record, no titles. Just initials on printed memos and unreadable security badges. One story tells of an analyst who tried to audit HVAC maintenance logs and was told bluntly, Don't ask about level X, that's not your concern. He wasn't fired, he was transferred to Alaska with no warning. And then there's the camera feed. One angle, one hallway, no timestamp. Just a flicker once every few weeks when the lights pulse and a shadow moves. Not toward the door, away from it. Of course, the Bureau denies any of this. They say it's just a structural anomaly, a misalignment in the blueprints, an internal logistics space. But then why the locked fire doors with reinforced plating? Why the missing security footage from elevator cameras during certain maintenance windows? Why are former agents, even retired ones, so unwilling to speak on record about that specific section of the building? Some theories go further. They claim the archive isn't just a storage space, it's a black site, a domestic one, a place where witnesses vanish, where interrogations don't require signatures, where evidence isn't just hidden, but erased from memory itself. And in a way, maybe it's better that we don't know, because if a democracy needs a floor it can't admit exists, if justice needs a space beyond law, then maybe the truth really is too dangerous for daylight. Maybe what they're hiding isn't a secret, but a habit. So now you know 4 things you were never meant to hear. A plan to terrorize Americans in the name of patriotism. A string of deaths wrapped in silence instead of answers. A machine that reached into your thoughts and refused to let go. And a floor that doesn't exist because it was never meant to. The question isn't whether these things happened. They did. The question is, how many more are still unfolding, quietly, in rooms we'll never see, on floors we're not allowed to name. This is off record. You weren't supposed to hear this, but now that you have, don't forget it, ever.